Congressman Schiff, and I want to welcome all of you here today. Last week, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is based in London, announced that the Syrian civil war had claimed the lives of at least 150,000 people, one-third of whom are civilians, 50,000 men, women, and children. Millions more have been forced to flee their homes to neighboring Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, and even Iraq. And millions more have become internally displaced, their fates hanging on the ebb and flow of battle. While all of Syria's people have suffered from the fighting, it is the minority populations, and especially Syrian Christians, who are most at risk. These are some of the oldest Christian communities in the world, dating back to the 1st century AD, and have lived in Syria for 2 millennia. About 2 weeks ago, the town of Kessab, which is predominantly Armenian Christian, was attacked by Al-Qaeda-linked fighters who had crossed over from Turkey. In the ensuing rampage, the town was emptied, with the victims fleeing for their lives. Many of the residents of Kessab are descendants of the victims of the Armenian genocide of 1915. There's a particular poignancy to their being targeted in this manner almost a century after the start of the genocide. Since the war began, many of us have raised our concerns over the dangers facing Syrians of Armenian descent and other Christians. I've spoken to the President about this directly, questioned our ambassador to the United Nations just last week, and urged the Appropriations Committee, on which I sit, to devote time, attention, and resources to aiding Syria's Christian community. In fact, this afternoon I'll be asking USAID Administrator Rajiv Shah about our efforts to reach the Christian communities still inside Syria. 2 months ago, several of us met with Bishop Armash Nalbandian, primate of the Armenian Church of Damascus, who was in the United States with several of the Christian leaders to discuss the plight of Syria's Christians. My great colleague Eshoo was also present for that meeting. During the meeting, we told the bishop and his colleagues that we were working to convince the administration to allow humanitarian parole for nearly 6,000 Syrian families with approved immigration petitions to the United States. I've been very proud to work with the Armenian American community on this issue. The Armenian National Committee and the Armenian Assembly have both been instrumental in bringing the issue before the American people and indeed the world. I'm very pleased that Aram Hamparian from ANCA is here with us today. The situation in Syria has continued to deteriorate in recent months, but I still believe that ending the Syrian civil war through a negotiated solution represents the best hope for safeguarding Syria's Christians. Absent a negotiated end, the danger to minorities will only grow as the potential for truly massive bloodshed increases. So we have our work to cut out today to bring an end to this conflict and also to focus attention on the plight of the Syrian Christian community, and particularly communities like Kessab, where so many Armenian families were forced to leave once again. At this point, I want to invite my colleague Brad Sherman from Sherman Oaks to make a few remarks. Mr. Sherman.
Yes, thank you. Hello, I am Brad Sherman from California's best named city, Sherman Oaks. Served for 18 years on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And this particular incident stands out in terms of what has happened to a small and defenseless group of people. The residents of Kessab, a predominantly Armenian town on the border between Syria and Turkey, watched a repetition of history on March 21, when they were forced to flee their homes to escape an attack by an Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group that crossed the border from Turkey. Some 700 families left their homes with only what they could carry, like their predecessors did between 1909 and 1915, when the Ottoman Empire forced people out of their homes and committed a genocide against the Armenian people. People ask today, why are we so intent on recognizing the Armenian genocide? I believe that the current government of Turkey would have been more careful in determining what rebels based on Turkish territory. If Turkey saw that the world insisted that Turkey play a positive role in dealing with the various minority communities in the countries that border Turkey and in Turkey itself. Now, most of those 700 families are now displaced, seeking refuge in the Armenian church in the neighboring city of Latakia. None of the residents of Kessab know how and when they'll be able to return or in what condition they will find their homes. I want to join with several of our colleagues in urging that the intelligence community and the State Department provide a classified briefing on what was Turkey's role in assisting or providing shelter to Al-Qaeda-linked terrorists who carried out this ethnic cleansing of the town of Kessab. I also urge the State Department to go further than acknowledging the troubling situation and provide us with a clear, and I think it would have to be classified, description of how an Al-Qaeda-linked group was able to enter Syria from Turkey on a mission of ethnic cleansing. So I look forward to that briefing. In the meantime, the director of USAID will be before the Foreign Affairs Committee as well as the Appropriations Committee tomorrow, and several of us will ask what can be done to help these refugees that are now in Latakia. I should turn this back to Adam Schiff and thank him for the leadership role he's played on this.
Sherman, now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Representative Eshoo, a champion of the Armenian community and a fabulous representative from the Silicon Valley of California.
Thank you, Adam, very much, but most especially for your extraordinary leadership on these issues, and to my colleagues who are really a team when it comes to Armenian American issues and the Armenian community abroad. I can't help but think, here we are again. Here we are again. Wherever there has been war across the Middle East, Christians have been targeted and have suffered enormously. And the recent rebel assault in the northern Syrian town of Kessab is yet another sad, sad chapter in what is taking place in the Middle East. And make no mistake that these communities, in this case the Armenians, are targeted because they are Christians. They are targeted because they are Christians, and now they are really residents on the chessboard of international politics. There is enormous suffering that comes with this, and as we anticipate the almost 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, it's like ripping a scab off of a wound. It runs very deep, it runs very broad, and it's a reminder. It's a reminder to us that the minority populations, in this case the Christians, the Armenian Christians, are simply targets, and they are easy targets. They are easy targets. In more than one Congress ago, Congressman Frank Wolf, Republican of Virginia, and myself, having worked on protecting minorities and Christians in the Middle East, we were convinced that we needed to introduce legislation to establish an ambassador-level position that would, in the United States, that would address these issues on the ground. In Republican and Democratic administrations, they've just been missing in action, in plain English. And we have been very successful in the House. We passed it almost unanimously in this Congress, and the bill has been heard in committee in the Senate. That bill needs to move to the President's desk because this is something that speaks to the values of the American people. And so America should have a representative on this issue. They should be there like white on rice, really. Excuse the expression, but it's so important that we have a presence on these issues. So I'm really very, very sad today. I'm very, very sad because these are the stories that my grandparents and my parents told me about. And history is repeating itself all over again as we stand here at this triangle. So I believe that with the right kind of pressure that's been spoken to by my colleagues and the passage of the legislation that I just described to you, that we can do something in the 21st century, because history keeps repeating itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Eshoo. And I just want to underscore something that the representative mentioned, and that is, while Kessab has focused the world's attention on the plight of Syria's Christians, and in particular Armenian Christians, Kessab is not alone. Christians have been attacked, kidnapped, and the victims of incredible violence in places like Homs, Aleppo, and elsewhere throughout Syria. So while Kessab has really grabbed our attention as Christians and Armenian Christians expressed in other parts of Syria as well, this is a nationwide disaster within Syria, and part of our coming together today is to call attention not only to Kessab, but to the plight of minorities throughout Syria and the incredible humanitarian catastrophe that has become that civil war. With that, let me introduce Representative Jim Costa of California's Great Central Valley, who represents a very large Armenian community. Mr. Costa.
Adam Schiff, for your leadership in these efforts. Thank you, Anna Eshoo, for your excellent words, and Brad Sherman and Judy Chu for your support in speaking out, because this morning we are speaking out on behalf of Armenian Christians, but we are speaking out on behalf of all of those who have suffered as this continuation of history repeating itself has inflicted upon communities throughout the Middle East, in part, most recently, as a result of the Syrian civil war. The ruthless attacks by this Al-Qaeda-linked extremist to the Armenian town of Kessab indicates once again that the horrific conditions that families are facing in Syria. Minority Christian families that have been devastated as a result of this civil war. And as has been said previously, history is repeating itself as we almost reach the milestone of the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. This action should not be tolerated. Over the past 3 years, the Syrian Christians have paid the highest price in this civil war. And up until the last month in Kessab, it's been a safe haven for those seeking refuge. What's even more troubling for me are the reports that the Turkish government has aided these terrorists by providing them with military support and supplies. And that's why I think it's incumbent upon those of us in Congress who care deeply about this issue to provide the leadership, to speak out, and to ensure that our government provides the accountability necessary to get to the bottom of this. Our nation stands for the rights of all community populations throughout the world. We have been a beacon of light in terms of representing and reflecting the importance of the human dignity of mankind. The United States, therefore, cannot sit by idly while these extremists target civilians and force more than 2,000, in this instance, to flee their homes. The State Department must call upon Turkey to secure its border and to prevent terrorists from resupplying or fleeing back through Turkey. Only then can this nightmare end for the people of Kessab. But it's been 18 days. 18 days since the attack. And the questions for many of us is what has happened to those citizens of Kessab, those that have been taken hostage, those that may have been harmed. That is why we are bringing this issue to light today. Enough is enough. 18 days are too long, and it's time to bring this tragedy to an end. Obviously, as Congressman Schiff said, a peaceful negotiations to end the civil war is paramount to the long-term solution. But in the meantime, Turkey, Syria, and any responsible government in the Middle East must be held accountable to man's injustice to mankind, as we see once again history repeating itself, in this case to the Armenian Christians in the city of Kessab. So I join with my colleagues here, and we'll do everything we possibly can to bring greater awareness and to have our government raise the issue of accountability so this can stop once and for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Costa. It's now my pleasure to introduce Representative Judy Chu. She represents much of Pasadena and the San Gabriel Valley and a very large and vibrant Armenian community. Representative Chu.
Thank you, Congressman Schiff. Adam Schiff has been such a leader in fighting for Armenian Americans, and I appreciate it. I join my colleagues in expressing outrage at the attacks at Kessab. The Syrian civil war has raged for the past 3 years. Thousands have been killed and millions more displaced. The stories of people who fell to the violence and families that fled for their lives outrage us all as Americans. But in a conflict where violence strikes the innocent without notice or cause, we see time and time again that it's the Christian minority, including the Armenian community, that is especially vulnerable. This was made tragically clear last month when Islamic militants from Turkey crossed the Turkish-Syrian border and attacked Kessab, refuge for Armenians fleeing the Armenian genocide. It's where our genocide survivors started a new life. And throughout the Syrian civil war, this city served as a refuge for Syrian Armenians that were escaping the violence in Aleppo. Seeing this violence now is an unspeakable tragedy. That's why we cannot allow such atrocities to stand. It offends our values, it violates the sanctity of human life, it harkens back to one of the darkest chapters in human history. Let's return Kessab to the place of hope that it's been for the Armenian community for so many years.
Thank you, Representative Chu, for those words. Tomorrow we will commemorate here on the Hill the Armenian genocide, and we will rededicate ourselves to congressional recognition of the genocide, something that has been far too long in coming. But at a time where we call attention to events that took place 99 years ago, we feel it is vital to call attention to events taking place today, as another generation of Armenians are forced from their homes under threat of violence. Let me introduce Aram Hamparian from the Armenian National Committee to make a few remarks, and thank you for your great leadership on this issue.
Congressman Schiff, Congressman Sherman, Congressman Costa, of course, Congressman Eshoo and Chu. About 2.5 weeks ago, more than 2,000 civilians, unarmed civilians, were pushed from their homes in Kessab. 2,000 people now without a home. Who is behind this? Well, let's turn to our UN ambassador, Samantha Power. Let's turn to the chairwoman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Dianne Feinstein. Both have pointed to extremists, people who do not share our belief in religious tolerance or freedom of faith. Very likely groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda were the ones behind this. Where did the attack come from? All the evidence points to Turkey and the role of Turkey in facilitating, possibly even encouraging this attack, which leads us to the conclusion that there need be a zero tolerance policy on the part of our government to any NATO ally, Turkey in this case, but to any NATO ally conspiring with Al-Qaeda to target religious minorities. We need to know, we deserve to know, if one of our allies, possibly even our arms, are being enlisted in the destruction of people who are innocent of any wrong and who simply are seeking to practice their faith. More broadly, beyond this crisis, which all of our friends are addressing so effectively, we will of course continue to push for all parties to keep their activities outside of residential areas, to not target civilian populations, and also to work with USAID and the State Department, as I know that our friends here are doing, to make sure that there are no gaps in the delivery of aid. Very often, for political reasons, geopolitical reasons, demographic reasons, logistical reasons, aid doesn't reach all the populations that are at risk. And as it turns out, the Armenian community of Aleppo and elsewhere in Syria has been left out largely, left out of the reach of the international stream of assistance, and we'd like to see that addressed as well. But just in closing, as Congressman Schiff noted, we very much appreciate all the support of so many members of Congress on this issue. Thank you.
Aram, thank you very much. At this point, we'd be happy to respond to questions. Yes.
Hi, I'm Seymour Hirsch, who I'm sure many of you appreciate his work throughout the years. Just issued an article this weekend called "The Red Line and the Red Line," and in it he makes the point, he asserts that not only was the Assad government not responsible for the chemical attacks last summer that almost led to attacks last year, but that it was orchestrated largely by Turkey, members of the Turkish government, Qatari government, Saudis, but also members of the U.S. Intelligence Committee and possibly agencies. So we all know the red line, Mr. Hirsch refers to it as the basically army of Al-Qaeda, in Syria. My question to Congress is, and I don't doubt your intention peace in this part of the world, but perhaps the only way to really establish peace is to remove one of the biggest provocateurs in this region, which happens to be the Turkish government. And what are your remarks on that? And if the only way to establish peace is to go for impeachment, what would you say to that?
Well, I'm not sure how to respond to that. I think there's no call for impeachment of our president in regards to the Syrian civil war. In terms of Turkey's role, and in fact that of other regional players, we have grave concerns about what they've been doing in terms of opening their borders to radical jihadis, as we have seen here with Turkey opening its border to Islamic fighters to come into Kessab. We're also, I think, very deeply concerned that other regional allies, and maybe Turkey as well, are allowing the funneling of arms to militant Islamic groups that are responsible not only for ethnic cleansing in places like Kessab, but for the most horrific atrocities. And that, I think, has to be a continual focus of our State Department, our intelligence agencies, and our administration, to put pressure on all of those in the region not to be supplying weapons to those who are committing these kind of war crimes. We've just been joined by Congressman Frank Pallone, one of the co-chairs of the Armenian Caucus, and I'd like to invite him to make a few remarks. Frank.
I really apologize for being late, and I certainly don't want to interrupt what Adam Schiff and all my other colleagues and members of the Armenian Caucus have been saying, but I just wanted to reinforce essentially what they have been saying. I mean, when I heard, and all of us heard, about what was happening in Kessab and the fact that Turkey, the Armenian Christians, had to flee, it was very upsetting to us because it reminded us so much about the genocide that occurred almost 100 years ago now. And many of the people, or at least their ancestors, were undoubtedly people who fled. So the U.S. has to be involved in providing more help for not only Armenians but other Christians in Syria who are basically being harassed and persecuted and forced from their homes because of the civil war. And one of the things that we did is we also wrote to the appropriators to ask that sufficient help be given to the Armenians and other Christians for humanitarian purposes, because we know that although this incident in Kessab is probably the most horrendous right now, that there are other Armenians and Christians throughout Syria that have had to flee their homes and have been killed and have been subject to loss of property and all kinds of other problems because of the civil war. And we have to make sure that the U.S. government is there to help out with humanitarian assistance and other ways of making it possible for them to stay in Syria if they want to stay, or go to somewhere else if they feel that they can't stay there anymore. So I just want to say that all of us within the Armenian Caucus are very concerned about this, and I thank Adam and the others for having this press conference today on such an important issue. Thanks, Adam.
I'd be happy to take any further questions. If not, I want to thank you very much for attending, and I want to thank my colleagues for all their leadership on this issue. We will continue continue to call the administration's attention to this and to call the international community's attention to the not only the plight of the Armenians and the Armenian Christians, but the minorities throughout Syria, and the just tremendous loss of human life, men, women, and children in this horrendous conflict. And I thank you for your time and attention today. Thank you.